Why do we have the ancient kingdom of Shalem up there? It sounds like Jerusalem, okay? But in the Bible, as we looked at last time, in Genesis 14, remember Abraham came to a guy named Melchizedek or Melchizedek, and he came to the city of Salem, it says in the English, S-A-L-E-M, but in Hebrew it's Shalem. And by tradition and by the location in the scriptures very clearly, this was the same place that would become the future name of Jerusalem. So I put this up here. We want to look at the ancient kingdom of Shalem, which is the ancient kingdom of Jerusalem before the Israelites gained control of it. A lot of Christians don't have an understanding that before Israel came in and made Jerusalem its capital and built a temple there, that there's a long history to that city that is an Israelite that was leading up to that. And how far back? Well, before we get to that, David wrote in Psalms, he said in Salem or in Shalem in Hebrew was set his tabernacle, his dwelling place in Zion. Now, instead of saying Zion, I'll say David Zion. We'll talk about this a little bit later. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, to where he had conquered the city of David, which we're going to show in a little while. And he didn't build the temple because he wasn't allowed to build the temple because there was a lot of blood on his hands in conquering the Philistines, an enemy. And God said, your son, Solomon, will be the one that builds the temple. So he was allowed to bring the ark into the city that he conquered, which was Jerusalem at that time. And this is what he's saying, in Salem, in Shalem, which he conquered because it was Shalem. And then later on we'll find out that the name changed to Jebus, or Yevus, and that's because the Jebusites were there when David came. But the ancient name was Shalem, and this is where the tabernacle of David, which housed the Ark of the Covenant, was. And Shalem, the city of David, Jerusalem, and Zion are all synonyms for the same place. Now today we hear the word Zion or Zion in Christianity, and we have spiritual thoughts. That's it. We don't really understand what does it really mean. Where does it come from? Hopefully tonight we'll find some definition with that. Well, we're going to go back 800 years before David. Now David conquered the city and made Jerusalem his capital somewhere around, give or take 1050 BCE. 1050, the third millennium, 3 millenniums ago. But 800 years before David, going back to approximately 18th to 19th century BCE, and this is going way back, that we have evidence not only from archaeological record, which we have demonstrated last time, that this was a Canaanite city that was well advanced. It was walled city. And we have these Egyptian texts that tell us that Jerusalem, the emerging years of it was in the central hill country, that it was such a dominant area of all the cities that were around there of the Canaanites. And we're going to come back to that, but I want to show you some names in the Scripture, just some synonyms in the Scripture themselves for the city that became Jerusalem, Shalem. Again, David writes, the city of the great king. In Hebrew, it's Kiryat Melech Rav, and is Mount Zion as far as the north, the city of the great king. Now, David the great king, but he was to be a picture of God the king, the city of the great king, the city of God, is another name for Jerusalem. In Jeremiah, we have Neve Zedek, the dwelling of the righteous, or the abode of the righteous, the holy hill of God. It's the dwelling of the righteous. In Isaiah, it's called Ariel. It's where the city where David camped. Ariel means lion of God. And David come from the line of Judah, okay? And the kings of Judah were always called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And then you get the idea that in the book of Revelation, at the end of it, in the beginning of the book of Revelation, it says that Jesus, or Yeshua, his Hebrew name, that he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, because he's a direct descendant from David when he was in the flesh, and he will be the king that was promised to David that will have an everlasting kingdom that shall never end. Now, there's these archaeological texts that were called the execration texts, and they date back to the second millennium BCE, about the same time, 19th century BCE, about 700-800 years before the time of King David. And these little vessels and these things they had, these were for the Egyptians. This is how they would curse the city-states that in the Canaanites and Philistines, that they try to have, they try to make vassalships over, and they try to control the area. Remember, Egypt was very powerful during the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember, the Israelites went into Egypt before the 10 plagues and all that, and they came out. But these execration texts, a couple of them in particular, from the 19th century BCE, these figurines, they have written on them that the name of what we call Jerusalem today, the Egyptian text says Rushalimim. So we know, they know from the archaeological record that this was Jerusalem. Okay, and the rulers of that time are listed. This Jerusalem was listed with Hatzor, Ashkelon, and Beit Shean. These are other ancient cities that's in the land of Israel today. And sometimes just in this area where Jerusalem is, only Jerusalem is listed in these execration texts, showing that it was a very dominant power of the surrounding area in that hill country back then. So we're talking almost 1,000 years before the time of King David when Israel came in there, just a little short of that. And of course, you know the story that that you have Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And I just mentioned they went into Egypt for it was actually 210 years of history. They were actually in Egypt, and then Moses brings them out. Joshua is the one that brought the children of Israel into the Promised Land. Okay, because Moses dies before and is buried before he comes in. And when they come into the land, remember that they walked around 7 times and marched 7 times around Jericho and the walls fell. That's when they came into the land. Then immediately they made peace with the Canaanite city of Gibeon, and they were to become allies with Joshua and the Israelites. But there's this Adoni-Zedek who was the king of Jerusalem. Okay, now it's not called Jerusalem at this time. This was written after the fact. Okay, after the fact, and we'll find out that the name of the city was Jebus of the Jebusites, but it's Jerusalem as you would understand it, looking back at history, as someone telling it a little further in the future and telling it backward. So this Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, is going to come and attack Gibeon, who just made peace with the Israelites and Joshua. He feels surrounded because all of a sudden Joshua is conquering all these Canaanite enclaves around him, and Adoni-Zedek feels threatened, so he's going to go to war. He's going to stop this march. And Joshua and the Israelites come from Gilgal. This is where they camped when they came over the Jordan River. Then they went to attack Jericho, but from there they launched. But the tabernacle stayed for 14 years in Gilgal, where the Ark of the Covenant stayed there for 14 years before eventually it would move to Shiloh under the time of the Judges, which was approximately 400 years. And remember the story, the sun stood still with Joshua, and in one of the battles the hailstones came down and defeated the forces that the Israelites were against. So obviously God was on their side. But Adoni-Zedek is slain. He's captured and slain by Joshua. He is the king of Jerusalem. And the soldiers of Adoni-Zedek, the soldiers of Jerusalem that day were surrendered. But Joshua and the Israelites did not take possession of Jebus or Shalem or what we call Jerusalem at that time when they came in. They didn't take possession. The city was a walled city. It was a fortified city. And nobody could conquer it. Nobody could conquer it until King David, and we're going to lead up to that.